So in this time, we're going to do kind of a panel approach and do a bit of truth telling. And I think Michelle is starting us off.
All right. We thought we'd share just some things we've learned over time working with our young people, and y'all can jump in and have some comments and questions, but looking at who this new generation is of young people, we have a new generation, the Gen Alpha that started this year, and they are, adaptable and empowered and connected, and we want to be the best parents and leaders we can with them. And as youth leaders, I think we're all pretty much in agreement that we have seen on most trips that young people cannot travel without melatonin. So that's my number one thing. And we said that about 10 years ago that we started to notice that. And the reason I'm bringing it up again is because it becomes an issue when the young people now are concerned that their friends can't go to sleep without some sleeping aid. And it used to be there was one sleeping aid in the grocery store. Now there's a whole rack. So it's not just young people, but I think that's an issue with the young people that we are seeing young people who are addicted in high school to Tylenol PM already, and looking at other ways to go to sleep to balance their medication, and what are things they can do, and using their parents' Ambien. And so how do we help them learn some breathing techniques to go to sleep on their own? How do we learn to settle their mind and quiet their hearts and their souls so that they can go to sleep naturally? And that's such a key thing that I think is important for our young people. Any questions or thoughts about that?
Also important for our parents to learn how to practice for themselves as well.
Yeah. And I'm not totally against melatonin, but I'm just saying we've seen it lead to, it's, the gateway to the next thing. Erica, yes.
Is anybody noticing what you're talking about with the sleep aids, which points to other realities for young people? Is that consistent across, different socioeconomic, ethnic groups? Is anybody aware of that?
Yeah, in talking to different people, we've noticed that. Jen, what about in your group of foster care kids?
Yeah, I noticed that psychiatrists are really quick to go ahead and prescribe it when they're prescribing those stimulants. It's kind of like the piggyback on any type of stimulant drug that these kids are getting prescribed. I hear it a lot in staffings. We do all of the elements of their care. And so the nurse will say they're on this for this, and then they're on this for sleep. And usually it's some sort of psychotropic drug followed by whatever it is for sleep. So yes, it's super common. And I think it's, psychiatrist visits are only 15 minutes. So it's a med check. They're in and out, and they just want to get the kids what they think they need. And I think it's overprescribed.
Yeah. Shannon, what have you seen?
I agree. I shared this earlier. Seniors in my group talked about how they just aren't sleeping enough, and then they were encouraging other young people to put some stuff aside, whether it was homework or tests or whatever it was, just to put it aside so they could get more sleep. Unfortunately, they mentioned melatonin use as the thing that helped them, along with you can put your notes down, or the staying up late studying for an exam isn't really going to help you. They can recognize that as they get ready to enter college, but I don't know that they're using that as a tool for sleep. They're, unfortunately, I think, utilizing melatonin. That's what I've seen too.
I had a second thing, Sophie, and then somebody else can share. But my second thing I noticed is the importance of helping develop sibling relationships early. I think that we're seeing more and more families that are segregating siblings because they're so programmed, and so then parents are doing date nights with different children, and families aren't doing family nights together, so their siblings don't really know each other. And the importance of trying to create and cultivate relationships for their children. And so that's something we're trying to encourage really young. How do we help as parents create those date nights for our children? So what if we give money to our children and they can go to a restaurant if they can all agree on the same place? Because that's another thing we see is that the young people all go to different restaurants because they all have different needs. But what if they could go out tonight if they all choose, and the parents are going to drop them off somewhere and they can go out to eat together? What if an older sibling develops some traditions with the younger sibling so that every year on Valentine's Day they do something, or every year on a certain day there's a tradition they do. It can be anything, any day, any tradition, but just creating those memories so that they have healthy relationships over time, and they know how to work out their problems together on their own without their parents. And that's such an important thing. And they also know how to tell each other that they care about each other. And so, we tell our young people in the church that you're to love one another, and we teach them how to love the stranger, but we often don't give them the skills to love their family in the ways that I think are important. And so I think that's so very important right now. Anyone want to comment on that, or anybody have different ways you would do that?
Can I piggyback on that? So actually a book I learned about from this group is called Thrivers. It's by Michelle Borba. Yeah. And you see mine has all the post-it notes on it. I'm doing a book study on that now, and at my church, and she quotes and talks about high school and college aged kids a lot, but so much in this book can be started much earlier in children's ministry. And I think one of the things I would lift a couple of things from the book. One is she encourages family mantras around a variety of things, around integrity, around self-control, self-regulation, around self-confidence, which is different than self-esteem. She also lifts up that what young people and children most need to hear is about their core, not about what they're producing. So I see, Michelle, that you were really honest when it was hard to be honest. One thing I dog tagged in the book that I may want to try at church is a teacher sent children home and said, ask the parents to tell their children core strength that they had. And she identifies a whole lot of those. And then when they came back with their character strength, they decorated a rock with their character strength on it and made a rock garden. And the children would go out with so much pride and say, this is how my parent sees me. That kind of core, developing that kind of core, strengthening our empathy muscle, that has a ripple effect on the whole rest of our lives. And that helps us get along with family and strangers, the whole thing. So I commend the book.
And what if you could do that about your siblings? What if you could tell your sibling, this is a strength I see in you? I mean,
yes.
that would go a long way.
Yeah. She encourages all of that kind of stuff in this book. It is fabulous and worth reading more than once. So thank you for the recommendation, friends.
Shannon, what truth telling do you want to do?
Oh, somebody was just asking about the name of
Oh.
the book. Type in, oh, never mind. Kim's got it. Kim's all over it. I'm going to echo the two things that were just mentioned, the sleeping, the book Generation Sleepless. I just flew through it while I was on vacation last week. Very, very helpful. And it has some great tools for helping regulate your kids' sleep and your own sleep, and reminding parents that we need to model those behaviors also. And in Thrivers, the piece that I took out that I talked with a group of parents about last week, and I will go ahead and lift up again, is just like Sophie said, naming who your kids are and the qualities that they possess, instead of lifting up the stuff they're producing. That's the best way to put it. Reminding my kid that they are empathetic and they care about other people so deeply is way more important than saying, oof, you got straight A's, great job. Those are things we need to do. I think in my current context, young people are really college prep oriented. Everything is about building that resume right now. I mean, and I'm talking as early as 7th grade. I've heard kids say, well, that's not going to get me into college. And so recognizing the stress, and we talked about this earlier, over scheduling and just needing a space to just play and be. And those of you who know me know that I do youth ministry, like I super program everything, and I've had to pause and let go of some of the programmatic pieces to just let kids play. And that's been a gift, I think, for me and for the young people. They have forgotten, I think some of it is COVID related, being isolated, some of it's technology related, constantly being connected through their phones, but they've forgotten just how to play, and they so need that downtime. And so just providing spaces in your homes, on car rides. I mean, young people always complain when I tell them they can't take a cell phone on a trip, and they'll complain for the first 30 minutes on any van ride. But the second we start playing a game and being in real conversation, they forget that they don't have their phones, and they just need spaces where they're not connected virtually. They need to have conversation face to face.
Kim, what about you? What is some truth telling you want to share?
I recently had a conversation with high schoolers who are all in large high schools. We're in a fairly affluent area, about drugs, and they were so misinformed or uninformed. So I think it's one of those things that, I had sitting in front of me some quote unquote really good kids who are not dabbling in drugs, and that's great. However, they're not equipped to have those conversations with friends who might be, or with people they see in the hallways, or people they run into at a party. And some of these were 17-year-olds. They were about to go to college next year. So it made me think, like, wow, we are really missing this conversation, at least in our church. And I think a lot of parents are like, oh, well, my kid's not doing that. My kid's really innocent. They're really young. They're really naive. They're not into that stuff. And that's probably true that they're not. But their friends might be, or the people across the hall might be. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do we equip our young people to have those conversations and give them the vocabulary. We all have heard about the fentanyl crisis in our country and how bad it's getting, and how it's been inserted into all sorts of substances. And so a young person might try something for the first time thinking it's one thing, and it's not, and it's deadly. And my youth didn't even know what the word fentanyl meant. They didn't understand that. So it just was an eye-opener for me, and hopefully for our parents as well, to say, ooh, we got to talk about this stuff. And like anything, the education they get off social media is not necessarily a helpful education. So learning how to be community around that, and how to care for your friends who maybe are headed down a dangerous road, would be a really helpful thing. Other than that, I really just echo what my colleagues have said, and sleep and rest and those things are not part of our culture. And so we have to be countercultural, and that involves some really hard decisions as a family and for teenagers. And so being intentional around those decisions and being intentional around how to form your family values around those decisions. It takes work. It doesn't just happen. And so figuring out how to put that work in is really important, I think.
Sophie, what about you? Do you have some truth telling?
I do some work with children in my church, also youth, but I take kids who finished 4th and 5th grade on an outdoor adventure trip. And over the last couple of years, part of what I've noticed is a lack of curiosity. And they are also using melatonin a lot. And a lack of curiosity and a lack of ability to just be. There's a good chunk of the trip where we are tent camping and we're outside, nobody has digital devices, and we're just being. I take some things to play with, but it's kind of limited, and we're at the campsite and we figure it out and what to play and how to interact. And I think those, wherever we can build in those kinds of experiences, I'm echoing what we've all said, even at a younger age, if you happen to have children that aren't in the teenage years yet, you're planting seeds, building a foundation that equips them better as they head into those middle school years that are hard. You know, they're going through puberty and everybody's body's different, and you're not, you know, everything's just changing and hard. And so the more we can help them develop a sense of begin to get to know their core, they can do hard things. They can work through anxiety. They can have their church family cheer them on to something that's new and different. And even if they didn't like it, they still got through it. Yay. I just think that, and I think the kids and parents being away from each other, I don't post as much online as I used to, because I want parents to have some practice of not being right on top of their children, and know that they're okay. They're going to be okay. They're going to be fine. And when they get home, part of what I say to parents is, you're the story catchers. When any of us have had a transformational experience, the way it moves from our head and gets integrated into our heart and our spirit is when we tell the story. So be the story catchers, ask open-ended questions. What did you learn? Where did you stretch? Tell me about. I think anytime we can help children practice and young people telling their stories, figuring out what they're learning, figuring out what their strengths are, holding up that mirror for them, that's a beautiful gift that's much better than where they get into college. But that's just a little Sophie soapbox.
That's really helpful, though, to think about. I think I just had a conversation with Scout leaders who had some different opinions about what to do on Scout trips. And one of the Scout leaders said, we plan a couple hours where they just have nothing to do and they have to figure it out. And they have to create, we don't give them anything. you know, they just have to figure out how to play, how to enjoy being, you know, and several of the parents said, you know, I think you're wasting their time. You know, we need to figure out what to do. We can add another merit badge course in there. And, you know, they're really dead set on providing space for them to do nothing, and know how to do nothing so that, you know, they can do that in life and know how to function in the world in that way, because that's
So
really hard.
So I think that's one of those pieces about us overscheduling our kids, right? Is that when they go, with the assumption that many will go to college, and they get to college and they've been these overscheduled kids or just high achieving children, they get to college and then they're all of a sudden, they don't have to be in 100 clubs. They don't have to play a sport. They don't have to do all these things. And that downtime, they don't, you know, may be boredom, but they don't know how to use that downtime. And that can feel like loneliness, which often then spirals into isolation and depression and not knowing how to reconnect, because you're for the first time not being busy again, like, or just being busy. And I mean, I vividly remember that from my freshman year of college thinking, wow, what do I do with all this free time? And then trying to find healthy ways to fill that time instead of unhealthy ways. It's not always easy, right? But I can remember thinking about how much free time I had and never experiencing that before. And that was 30 years ago. So only imagine how, I mean, our kids are so much more scheduled now, how much more difficult it is for them to fill their time.
So that is really fascinating to me, because I'm now thinking about this from the perspective of a program director. You know, at Cross, we welcome youth groups, multiple youth groups a week. And we noticed this year in particular, there was a lot of comments on the evaluations about the kids having too much downtime. And that there was nothing for them to do. There was no structure in that downtime. And so I automatically thought, oh, well, we've got to provide something for them to do. Like, let's put out, you know, markers and coloring and games. But listening to you all speak about this, I think that's what it's, and we're talking about like maybe an hour or 45 minutes between, say, dinner and the evening program. I think that's really interesting, that both young people don't know how to do nothing, and it makes adults anxious.
I think it can also make young people and children anxious.
Yeah.
And yet the brain research tells us that boredom is really important. It rests the brain. It's also when we relax and have a little boredom, it's you get more creative. It's like when you've worked and worked and worked on a problem and you're stuck, and you get up and go take a shower or a walk. You have movement. You take a break from it. All of a sudden, boom, pops the good idea, right? Or creative option. The one other thing I might lift up that is just on my mind right now. I think one of the gifts of COVID is a lot of us took children and young people outside. And at least in our context, our young people and children loved it. We were at parks, we were outside. I'll recommend another book. It's kind of big, but it's called The Coyote Guide to Connecting with Nature. I'm actually doing a class on this at ARW in May, but it talks about the value of being outside and connecting to the earth, and literally what that does to our physical beings, but also our spirits. I know for me that being outside is a place I connect with God more easily. And for a lot of young people, that can also be true. So that's something I noticed, and I'm trying to find ways to hold on to being outside and having some free time outside in community, if that makes sense.
Let me see if there are any questions from anybody about just what we're seeing with young people with this generation, with Generation Z or Generation Alpha. There's a question in the chat. Does it have to be without anything to do, or is it without a planned activity? What do y'all think?
I think that's a yes to both of those answers. I mean, in my last congregation, we would just, during COVID, we still weren't meeting indoors as much as possible. So we would just put, for the first half hour, a whole bunch of outdoor games stuff out there, and they would just play. And inevitably what I thought they would play with, they didn't play with. You know, they would make a game out of something else. So, and then there's always kids who don't want to do the physical stuff. So we would make sure we had cards, Jenga, whatever, just laying around. Again, sometimes they just needed to sit and talk with their friends, but sometimes they'd come up with a game. They were teaching each other games, if they're given the space to do so without clear instruction.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Shannon, I think for families too, you could do that as well. Just create space where there's, you know, cards laying out or puzzles laying out or something where you can just, or craft stuff, or you could just do stuff. Anna's asking, been surprised by the behavior of teens, and is that related to COVID, or has it always been this way? And I think you're talking about the bad behavior, or
yes, bad behavior.
do you want to give a couple examples, or just?
Well, I'm thinking in my case, some of the stuff we saw at the confirmation retreat, for example, just the disrespect, just when an adult tells you to do something, blatantly not doing it, just surprised me. And again, I don't know if I'm just out of touch with that age group or if it's COVID related. I'm not sure.
What do y'all think? Shannon, Kim, Sophie?
I hear what you're saying, and I've seen that more in our like 4th to 7th grade zone, more so than our upper high schoolers who had been part of youth group pre-COVID, knew the expectations, had the break, and then came back. The ones coming into youth group are a little bit more feral. I think they're just a little wild. And so I think COVID has something to do with it. It might not have everything to do with it, but I think not having structure, not having to be disciplined in a classroom kind of setting, and that kind of rubbing off into a church setting, not being in a church setting, not having conversations with older adults and being taught, this is how you talk to Mr. and Miss so-and-so. We just missed a chunk of that. So I do think it has something to do with it, and you are not alone in seeing that.
Yeah, I think you're right in that the interaction with adults is key. That, you know, before COVID, you saw adults at church, and so you had respect for adults that you worked with, even if you didn't know them, you knew you were going to see them at church. And so now it's like, I don't know who you are, and so I don't need to respond to you. And it's a different way of engaging, and they're out of that habit. And so I think there is a initial disrespect that comes, but I think you're right, for the kids who knew the patterns of how we function in the church and how we behave in youth group, that's come back really naturally. It's for the kids who haven't been around that it's really hard, and the kids who've been here are looking at the other kids going like, what are you doing? Yeah.
I was having this conversation with a youth leader at a large church with a very robust youth group, and that's what she was saying. She was saying, particularly of the 9th graders, And she described it as youth group etiquette. They've forgotten how to be around each other in social groups, and describing some of the things you were describing, Anna, but also like having a difficult time transitioning from like game time to now we're going to have a discussion, or now we're going to move into prayer time. So she's having to take more intentional time with transitions and explaining, okay, that was game time and running around. Well, now we're going to sit and we're going to listen to each other. And she attributes it to COVID, to not being in social groups in face to face and not knowing how to act.
So we still use language of covenant, right? We write covenants, but we have also shifted a little bit to core values, like with our young people, like what do we value when we are together in this space, and reminding them of those core values and letting them name it, just like in a covenant. You can use whatever language you like, is really important. I would say, Anna, I don't know your context, and I'm in a new-ish context. It has not even been a full year. But I will say it takes time to build trust with young people, right? And I haven't had to do that in 16 years until this year, right? But it takes some time for them to recognize what your expectations are. And if they can't recognize it, then you need to name it for them. Here are my expectations when we're together, that you're going to treat me like a child of God, because that's who I am, and I'm going to treat you like a child of God. And that can be your just most simple thing that you say. And so when they maybe act out, you say, I'm a child of God, please treat me that way. Or if they act out to a friend, they are a child of God, please treat them that way. And just that constant reminder and that language helps frame it without being using my teacher, you're being disrespectful, right? Like instead of doing that, but just framing it. And this is what we need from each other to be able to function in community and in this space and to be safe. The other thing I would say is get some more adults around, which is really hard to do post-COVID because volunteers have gone by the wayside and some people are anxious about coming back into the church spaces. But if you can get more adults, the better. And then don't be afraid to reach out to parents. Parents want to know what their kids are up to. And if their kids are not living into those core values and abiding by the covenant, they are 9 times out of 10, and I would say 9.9 times out of 10, they want to hear, and they will be right by your side and partner with you to make sure things improve. I don't know.
Sometimes they're struggling just as much as we are with them.
Yes.
What other questions do y'all have for us?
Well, I might add too that I've noticed with our middle schoolers, they might be a little socially stunted from COVID, and including social norms stunted, but I've found that they are a little more emotionally stretched maybe after COVID. I think probably if they're inside at their house all day, every day, and their mom's going, how are you today? How are you doing? Everyone was so worried about their mental health. I think they talked a lot about how they're feeling during that COVID time, more than the average middle schooler would have pre-COVID. So sometimes it's helpful to lean into that a little bit on some one-on-one conversations. If you do take someone aside and say, what's going on here? Why are we acting this way? And get into that emotional piece, that might be a more fruitful conversation.
Thank you.
Can I ask the parents who are on here, if there are parents on here, what do you need from your youth workers or your church staff? What would be helpful for you?
Hey, I think I don't know what screen y'all are seeing. So if you see the top of my ceiling, I'm sorry. I'm not really sure. I think, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Okay. So I think the best thing I have done over the course of a couple of years are the book studies with Michelle and the other parents. It combines faith and other parents' experiences with a lot of research. And sometimes as a parent, you have gut instinct, but you're not really sure what you're you don't necessarily know what you're doing. And sometimes to have it backed up, or you're like, okay, that's why that is going the way it's going, is because of all the research. Like the whole thing that y'all have been talking about with sleep is huge for me, you know, because I have one good sleeper and one horrible sleeper. So I just think that type of information, and it's kind of wrapped in with our church, is such a gift that I can't thank y'all enough. And please continue to do seminars such as this. I was on the one before with the about social media. Just helping us put more tools in our bag is so helpful. So if y'all could keep doing that, that would be great. And I'll shut up now.
Thank you. Other parents?
I might jump in here for just a minute. I am a parent and a youth worker. But what I've kind of noticed is, like, parents in our area, they want resources and they want help. But to be able to pinpoint what that help is sometimes is a little hard. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed with trying to even take the time to read the resources that might be helpful, or to watch a seminar or something. I just see parents being so overwhelmed. And so what I've tried to do is send resource parents by sending very small tidbits, even if there's something, you know, a whole lot more that I'd like them to know, kind of get a bite-sized piece first. And then, so for example, I was thinking about the technology stuff. Great 45-minute session, right, with the technology. But people would struggle. My parents would struggle to watch that, perhaps, though they'd want to. But if I could pull out one piece of advice from that, you know, and send that along. And then if they want more information, because I certainly don't want parents to feel bad about not having the time, you know, to watch something that I send. So I'm very careful about what resources I pass along, though they want them. So it's kind of a catch between, we want to know more, but we struggle with all the daily things of a job and raising kids and trying to learn. And how do we help resource parents without making them feel overwhelmed, I guess.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, I think the other piece too is reminding parents that they are doing a great job, that there are so many things that we can be learning, but we're also doing a great job loving our young people where they are and for who they are. And that's where we start. And, you know, loving our young people is pretty easy on most days. And so we stay there and we work hard at that and applaud ourselves for what we can do in those moments. So yeah, thank you, Wendy, for that. Any other
Also,
comments, questions?
As
Yeah.
a youth worker and a parent, I'm a parent of young kids, but practicing having safe conversations in the church. So whether it be about sex or drugs or whatever it is, but having that safe space, kind of like Kim, what you were talking about earlier, but to practice having those conversations, to get familiar with the words. You know, we've learned throughout our research that talking about suicide does not increase suicidal ideation amongst children and youth. So getting comfortable having those conversations and using those words, because it's things that their friends are facing, but having that safe space to maybe say that word out loud for the first time. And then to like equip parents to have those conversations at home, to encourage parents to go to the pharmacy and to get naloxone or Narcan so that they have it in their first aid kit at home. We're learning that, like you said, it could be the very first time someone tries something and they overdose, and not having that readily accessible could be deadly. And so just not normalizing the conversation necessarily, but practicing having those hard conversations. I think, like, as a parent, it goes so far. Like, you get that foundation at church, and then you come home and your kids talk about it a little bit more. I implemented the old 90s pals and wows at our family dinner table, because I was tired of saying, like, what did you do at school today? Nothing, we played, blah, 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 whatever. And so we do pals and wows. And sometimes if, they don't have one, I'll ask some more prodding questions. What was your favorite part? What was the part that made you sad, or whatever? And the other day I started in on, Maggie, can you share a high from today? And she said, Mommy, I did not have a high. I did not have a low. I did not have a favorite part. I had a day. And this is coming from a 4-year-old. But but then it was like this moment of, Shannon, what you were saying about that she just needed some space to play. She didn't need the 24 questions from mom. She needed just the space to have a day. And it was just this moment of like, okay, turn off your Christian educator brain for a moment and just let her be a kid. But I think creating that space as youth workers to practice having those hard conversations and equipping youth with children and youth with the tools and the vocabulary and the appropriate definitions of the vocabulary. Like I'm doing the coaching on faithfully forward conversations about sex and spirituality right now. And the whole reason I'm doing it is so that I can practice having those conversations as an adult, so that I'm ready to do it. And I'm doing it in a safe space with people that I trust. And I think we create those circles of trust within our youth groups and our church groups. And so just having that safe space for conversation, I think, is so important, and not being afraid to talk about the hard stuff.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'm a parent and just became a youth worker this year, but I taught high school for a long time. I said in the comments, I would always remind parents, I would say to parents in meetings, your kid at home, we know them at school. And so just to remember that if you have a teenager, to remember in your teenage years how important friends are. They tend to serve, those relationships tend to be the most important, So I think and my daughter's 12, so I'm entering that middle school, getting closer to teenage age, but just constantly reminding myself of like, you got to you got to pay a lot of attention, right? And talk to them a lot and just know who their friends are, and just be as aware as you can, I guess, without being a complete helicopter parent, but just, sometimes, I don't know. I think there was a lot of parents that would have been very surprised at things their kids did at school. Very surprised.
I
have one more thought. As a college athlete, I, played golf my whole life. And I worked so hard. And it was this thing like stuck on a pedestal of like, you work so hard to do all these things. You miss all these really important other things in your life because you're working so hard to become a college athlete. And then you get to college and you're like, oh, this is it. This is what I've worked my entire life for. And it's been this like thing way off, that not very many people accomplish. So I think getting some of those conversations going, I mean, yes, it's great and wonderful. And I could not have gone to college without a college scholarship. But I think finding those people in your churches who can come and have those conversations, those old college athletes that have been there, done that kind of thing, and talking about how important it is to experience all of the other things that are available to children and youth, because it's not the end all be all of your whole life, I promise. Since I've been out of college, I maybe have played golf 10 times. And, I played every day for 18 years leading up, not 18 years, but leading up to college. But I just remember this moment of getting to college and thinking, this is it. Like, I mean, and it was cool and wonderful. But it was also another full-time job all through college. And so Shannon, you were talking about, like, well, where did you get in? Or, they're doing all these things to look good on a resume. And I just remember getting finally on the other side of it. And I started talking about like my statistics one day at practice. And then I realized like, none of that matters. Like it really didn't once I was there and I had made it. And like, yes, you want to play in all the tournaments and do all the things, but I think just normalizing having a normal experience too, and that not everybody has to be a college athlete.
So Jen, that brings up two other things. Like, how do our kids define themselves, right? Like my son, I'm going to say this, he always says, if my story helps somebody else, I'm okay with you sharing it. So I'll just share it and I'll be brief. He was a basketball player. Like, that's what he did. That was it. Junior year, his knee started bothering him, right? Could play for like 2 minutes strong, then was limping for the rest of the game, or his coach would yell at him and pull him out, right? Like, and it was just devastating because his identity was so wrapped up in that one thing. And that's why I think, and that's when we started seeing that his mood change, and we were afraid, we didn't know how to name it. So that's why I mentioned earlier in an earlier workshop, like, ask the hard questions, name the things that you are noticing, gut instinct as a parent or a teacher or a youth worker, and ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid to do that, because it was life-saving to when someone else said the words to him, right? How are you really feeling? But I will just say that's why also the thing that was in the chapter in Thrivers, I'll just keep holding this book up like y'all can see it because it's blurred out. But Sophie mentioned, but in that chapter on self-confidence, naming the qualities that your kids have that aren't product-based, like what they produce. They are more about like who their personality is. They are kind, they are good, they love their siblings, right? They love hard, they're empathetic, they're really patient, they're pretty perceptive about other people. Like, helping your kids know that their worth is so much more than I'm an athlete, or I'm good with computers, I build computers. Like, who they are, naming that, I think gives our kids tools to be more resilient when they do have injuries, or, you know, they stop doing well in one subject that they've always excelled in. I think we need to remind them who they are is beyond their production, their product.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Good point. Any other comments or questions? Thank y'all for being with us today. This has been a good conversation, a great day. And a lot of y'all have been with us all day, so I'm grateful for you staying with us. Thank you for all of you who've shared some thoughts and done some truth telling with us. So the peace of Christ be with all of you.
And also with you.